Imagine a world holding its breath, a world where every news broadcast could bring the announcement of an impending catastrophe. Families gathered around their television sets, their faces etched with worry as they watched the latest updates on the escalating tensions between superpowers. The threat of total destruction hangs in the air, a silent spectre that looms over every aspect of life. The power to annihilate entire cities, to end millions of lives in an instant, was no longer a distant nightmare, but a tangible reality. This wasn't a scene from a science fiction movie. It was the daily existence for millions of people. Public service announcements instructed citizens on what to do in the event of a nuclear attack, while military parades showcased the might of nations prepared for the unthinkable. It was the reality of the Cold War. Leaders like JFK and Khrushchev navigated a precarious balance, their every move scrutinized, their decisions carrying the weight of potential global annihilation. The Berlin Wall stood as a stark symbol of the ideological divide that threatened to engulf the world in flames. For almost 50 years, the United States and the Soviet Union stood toe-to-toe, armed with weapons that could end civilization. Missile launch sites were on constant alert, nuclear warheads were transported under heavy guard, and military drills were a routine part of life, all in preparation for a war that everyone hoped would never come. The fear was palpable, a constant weight on the shoulders of everyday people. School children practiced duck and cover drills, families built bomb shelters in their backyards, and civil defense exercises became a grim part of the social fabric. The looming threat of nuclear war was a shadow that darkened every aspect of life. The possibility of nuclear war wasn't a question of if, but when. News broadcasts were filled with updates on the latest nuclear threats, while anti-nuclear protests erupted around the world, voices raised in a desperate plea for peace. Cold War speeches echoed with the tension of a world on the brink, a world where the shadow of nuclear war was an ever-present reality. After World War II, a new conflict emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies, became locked in a struggle for global dominance. This was the Cold War. It wasn't a hot war with direct fighting. Instead, it was a battle of ideologies, a clash between capitalism and communism. Both superpowers engaged in a dangerous arms race, amassing vast nuclear arsenals. Fear and mistrust fueled this rivalry, pushing the world closer to the brink. The Cold War saw several moments where nuclear war seemed inevitable. The tension between the United States and the Soviet Union was palpable, and the threat of mutual destruction loomed large over the world. Both superpowers were armed to the teeth with nuclear arsenals capable of annihilating the planet many times over. One such instance was the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. This was perhaps the closest the world has ever come to a full-scale nuclear war. The crisis began when American reconnaissance planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. The Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores. This bold move was a direct challenge to American dominance in the Western Hemisphere and a significant escalation in the Cold War. The United States responded with a naval blockade, preventing further Soviet shipments of military equipment to Cuba. For 13 tense days, the world watched as the two superpowers stared each other down. The fate of humanity hung in the balance as President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev engaged in intense negotiations. The world held its breath, fearing that a single misstep could lead to catastrophic consequences. Another close call was the Korean War, from 1950 to 1953, where the US and Soviet Union backed opposing sides. The Korean Peninsula became a battleground for the Cold War, with North Korea supported by the Soviet Union and China, and South Korea backed by the United States and its allies. The conflict could have easily escalated into a nuclear confrontation. Both sides were heavily armed, and the potential for a wider war involving nuclear weapons was a constant threat. The war ended in a stalemate, but the tension and the possibility of nuclear escalation remained. These events serve as stark reminders of how close we came to disaster. The Cold War era was marked by a series of high-stakes confrontations that could have led to nuclear war. The world watched in fear, hoping that cooler heads would prevail. Thankfully, diplomacy and negotiation ultimately averted catastrophe, but the lessons of those perilous times continue to resonate today. What if cooler heads hadn't prevailed during the Cuban Missile Crisis? What if a miscalculation or miscommunication had tragically occurred? The consequences are chilling to contemplate. A single nuclear detonation would have been catastrophic, but a full-scale exchange between the superpowers would have unleashed unimaginable devastation. Millions, perhaps billions, would have perished in the initial blasts and the ensuing firestorms. Section 5. Fire and Fury, the devastating power of nuclear war. Nuclear weapons are unlike any other weapon ever created. Their destructive power is immense. A single bomb can obliterate an entire city in an instant. The heat from the explosion would vaporize everything in its path. Buildings would crumble and forests would ignite. Those who survived the initial blast would face a slow and agonizing death from radiation poisoning. Section 6, From the Ashes, a World Remade. In this chapter, we delve into the grim possibilities of a world reshaped by the devastating impact of nuclear war. The aftermath of a nuclear war would be a nightmare scenario, cities reduced to rubble and the very fabric of society torn apart. Global fallout would contaminate the air, water and soil. The invisible poison of radiation would seep into every corner of the Earth, making once thriving ecosystems inhospitable. Crops would fail, leading to widespread famine. The food supply chain would be disrupted, leaving millions to face starvation. The scarcity of resources would drive people to desperate measures. Governments would collapse, and social order would disintegrate. The institutions that once held society together would crumble under the weight of chaos and anarchy. The survivors would be left to rebuild in a world forever scarred by the horrors of nuclear war. Communities would have to start from scratch, relying on their resilience and ingenuity to survive. Some experts believe that new global powers might emerge from the ashes, seizing the opportunity to reshape the world order. These new leaders would face the monumental task of rebuilding civilization, while others predict a complete societal collapse. The future would be uncertain, with humanity standing at a crossroads. Would we learn from our past mistakes? Or would history repeat itself in an endless cycle of destruction and rebirth? Amidst the bleakness, there would be glimmers of hope. Communities coming together, people helping one another, and the indomitable human spirit striving to create a better future. A world remade from the ashes would be a testament to our resilience and our capacity for renewal. It would be a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always the possibility of a new dawn. Section 7. Could we survive? The fragility of human existence. The question of whether humanity could survive a full-scale nuclear war is a sobering one. While some might find refuge in underground bunkers or remote locations, the long-term effects of radiation would be unavoidable. The very fabric of our civilization would be torn apart. The survival of our species would be in doubt. Section 8. Learning from the past. The importance of dialogue and diplomacy. The Cold War, though terrifying, offers valuable lessons. It underscores the importance of dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. The leaders who navigated the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, understood the stakes and chose negotiation over confrontation. Their actions prevented a global catastrophe. We must learn from their example and prioritize peaceful solutions to international conflicts. Section 9. The nuclear threat today, a new era of uncertainty. The Cold War may be over, but the threat of nuclear war remains. New actors have emerged on the world stage, some with nuclear ambitions of their own. The global geopolitical landscape is more complex and unpredictable than ever before. We must remain vigilant and work towards a future free from the threat of nuclear annihilation. Section 10. Our shared responsibility. Securing a peaceful future. The responsibility to prevent nuclear war rests on all of us. We must demand that our leaders prioritize diplomacy and disarmament. We must educate ourselves and others about the dangers of nuclear weapons. And we must strive to build a world where peace and cooperation prevail. The future of humanity may very well depend on it.